The Chemistry of Life by Miss Huskins. Biology is the study of life and all living things and its components. Chemistry is a study of matter. That's anything that has mass and occupies space. Life is organized from pretty much the smallest, simplest component all the way up to the largest and the most complex. Well, I should probably say from the smallest to the largest because you can get entire PhDs on that smallest component there. But the atom is the smallest part of anything. It's the smallest part of an element. So think about it as that it has properties of what an element is on a periodic table. You combine those elements together and you get a molecule. Many molecules will organize themselves into organelles. Organelles are just small components within a cell. It takes lots of cells to make a tissue, and the more tissues we layer on top of each other, the more we can closely form what is known as organs. You put a bunch of organs together and you get an organ system. Organ systems working together harmoniously makes an organism. Lots of different organisms, like a herd of something, will make a population, and a population interacts with its community and its surroundings. It also has a climate, and so when the community is part of a climate system and vegetation system, we get an ecosystem. Lots of ecosystems side by side will make a biome based on the latitude that they are on the planet. And all together, our biomes create our biosphere. Living things are made up of 6 necessary elements, or I call them affectionately chnops, but they're carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, phosphorus, and sulfur. Cells, they're the most basic unit of life that function with living characteristics. So let's talk atomic structure. Atoms are made up of subatomic particles, protons, neutrons, and electrons. Protons have a positive charge, neutrons have a neutral charge, and of course electrons are negatively charged. Protons and neutrons are in the center of the atom. They give the atom mass, and then electrons float around in the surrounding electron cloud. The atom's mass is mainly positively charged, right? The center of the atom is positively charged. And the atom's volume is mainly negatively charged. So the physical space that is taken up, the most of the atoms taking up, is negatively charged. On the periodic table, elements are organized by their atomic number. And if you're looking at the periodic table, you will notice that the symbol for the element is in the center, its atomic number is here on top, and then its average atomic mass is on the bottom. So an atom can be identified by basically its atomic number, which is its number of protons. Every element has the same number of protons, but it can have different numbers of neutrons. And the different number of neutrons will make up their isotopes. They're the same element, but they have different masses of that element. Isotopes are essentially 2 or more forms of the same element, and we're talking different numbers of neutrons. That's how we get that this number is average atomic mass. Now, when we write the element's name, we typically talk about its mass number. For example, you can see here that hydrogen has 3 isotopes. We have hydrogen 1, hydrogen 2, and hydrogen 3. Each of these atoms will have 1 proton because that's what defines it as hydrogen. But there are 3 different isotopes of hydrogen. This one here has 0 neutrons. This one over here has just 1. And the third isotope of hydrogen has 2 neutrons. So the first one weighs 1, the second one weighs 2, and the third one weighs 3. Hence we call it hydrogen 1, hydrogen 2, and hydrogen 3. Here are 3 sample practice problems. Pause the video for a moment and see if you can determine the questions. Here I have the elements as they appear on the periodic table. Pause the video. In the element sodium, right there is its atomic number. So that means sodium has 11 protons. Its electrons, basically protons, are equal to electrons in a neutral atom, so it also has 11 electrons. The fluorine atom is right here. Protons are this number. So fluorine has 9 protons. Its average atomic mass is 18.99, so we use rounding rules and we call that 19. If it weighs 19 and 9 of those are protons, the rest of them must be neutrons, which is 10. So, protons plus neutrons equal average atomic mass, and that is right there. The average atomic mass for oxygen is right here at the bottom, 15.999. And we say 15.999 because it's wanting its average atomic mass, which is the number that's printed on the periodic table. Here's its atomic number of oxygen. So oxygen has 8 protons. Here are the answers for the pause in practice. Now, the center of the atom, the protons and neutrons are what give it mass, but the outside of the nucleus of the atom has all of the electron clouds. It has the electrons, and the electrons are what bond with other different types of atoms to make these molecules. The electrons are divided into levels or energy levels, what we call shells. The innermost shell can hold up to 2 electrons, and the outer shell can hold 8, and those outer electrons are what we call valence electrons. Valence electrons are the electrons on the atom that interact with other atoms and do the bonding. The periodic table is divided into columns and rows. There are 7 periods in the periodic table. They're notated by these numbers right here, and they go across 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. If you look, 57 and 89 actually slip in right there. So this is actually period 6 and period 7. The columns are defined by also numbers, and there are 18 different columns, or what we call groups. And they also can identify how many valence electrons are in those groups. Everybody in column 1 has 1 valence electron. Everybody in column 2 has 2. That means all of these elements right here have 2 valence electrons or outer shell electrons. Everyone in this group has 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Hence how the second energy level inside of an atom can hold up to 8 electrons. So the maximum number is 8. These guys over here in the center, they're what we call multivalent, and we'll save that for next year for chemistry. Besides, everyone that we're going to talk about, CHNOPS, is in one of our known valence electron columns anyway. Hydrogen, carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, phosphorus, and sulfur. Most elements are considered unstable, which means they need more electrons in that outer shell to fill their valence and to be more stable. That's why they bond with other things. For example, lithium is in group 1. It only has 1 valence electron. We call that valence electron low-hanging fruit. It's so easily picked off. So lithium is very unstable. In fact, it's a metal that has to be stored in oil because it's so explosive and unstable. In order for it to be stable, it needs to gain 7 more electrons. When an element gains or loses electrons, it forms what's called a chemical bond. And these chemical bonds create compounds. When 2 or more elements bond together, they create a compound. For example, if sodium and chlorine bond, they make sodium chloride. Or if hydrogen gas and oxygen gas combine, they form H2O water. Together, they're called molecules. And most of the molecules that we're going to learn about are what we call covalently bonded. That actually means that they share their electrons. And for the most part, they're all nonmetals bonded together. So carbon dioxide, CO2, that's a nonmetal bonded together. Oxygen gas, 2 oxygens bonded together, water, those are what we call covalently bonded. And those are an example of the molecules that living things use. Some generalized chemistry terminology here. A covalent bond occurs when we have a nonmetal and a nonmetal bonded together. like carbon bonded to oxygen, and these guys share electrons. This sharing of electrons really determines the properties that that molecule is going to have. An ionic bond is different. That is when electrons are transferred. And that's usually between a metal, like sodium, and a nonmetal, like oxygen. When ionic bonds happen, there's usually a positive and a negative component. The positive component is called a cation, and the negative component is called an anion. Cations, which are positively charged, they lose electrons and they become more positively charged. Anions are gaining electrons and they become more negatively charged. We'll go over a lot of this in class so that you can see how the periodic table is laid out between the losers and gainers and the positive and negative charged elements and the cations and the anions. I have a very easy way for you to remember them. But for practice, let's see if you can fill in the chart. Can you pause the video and practice the chart? See how much of the chart you can fill in. Check your answers here.